The analogy would be if we're learning a language. You and I are talking right now. We're communicating back and forth. If I had muscle memory, I would come in here and I would just start speaking, and I would know the thing I was going to say. I wouldn't be paying attention to anything you're saying to me, and I would just talk for 40 minutes and say the same thing I said yesterday, and then it'd be done.
You could run for president.
Yeah. Yeah. Right.
There you go.
Politics, man.
You know, it's
That's
interesting
what
you
we
said
want.
that, because that's one of my things about music education and jazz studies and all of that stuff. You know, you go when take Quincy Jones, take Herbie Hancock, right? Take any of the masters like that are that age group. They didn't go to jazz studies school. They sat, they learned, they knew what was happening, and then they took it to another level. But they didn't take it to another level because somebody said, "Hey, look in this book. If you play this exercise to this is
No,
great."
they did the real jazz studies.
Right. And I mean, that's like something that when I went to school for music, right? I mean, you learned, it was really difficult to get into the improvisation thing and get out of just the technique thing and the what you had just been practicing forever.
Well, it's so hard, man. It's so hard to translate creativity into an academic environment. It's one of the biggest challenges of our society right now,
Mm-hmm.
because we have so many schools pumping out so many musicians that can all play so well, and very few of them are going to ever really work. Very few of them are going to do anything that is truly creative, that is truly original, when every single one of them has the originality. But to bring it out in an academic setting, because you don't create great things out of going and reading textbooks and replicating stuff.
Right.
And a lot of musicians in academia know this, but teaching it to, I mean, okay, I don't know, you'll have to double check me on this statistics, but one of my good friends who went to Berkeley told me the other day that Berkeley students, 80% of them will not even work in music. Berkeley graduates who can play
Sure.
the shit out of their instruments, 20% of them are going to go into music and play. The other 80% are going to go into the rest of the world. And I mean, granted, learning music is a discipline, and it teaches you amazing is the wrong word, but it teaches you various aspects of how to live life as a human being, which is complicated and
Yeah.
challenging. So it helps no matter what job you go into. But academia, we learn to be creatives through the challenges of life, through being introspective, through learning how to bring out a description of our actual human beingness
Mm-hmm.
through that instrument that we're playing. That's very, very different than learning how to execute the vocabulary correctly. If you're trying to be a jazz musician, it's good to know the vocabulary.
Right.
And it's unfortunate how closed-minded most people are, especially in the urban centers, to those who do not express specifically with the context of their vocabulary. It's like that in New York, especially. Chicago's much better about it, actually, than most of the urban
Yeah.
centers. LA is like that, but with a completely different vocabulary. It's like, if you don't know our shit, then we don't understand you, and you can't speak with us. They're not all like that. I'm not saying they're all like
Right.
that, but it's a highly competitive environment, and you have to be speaking with a unified vocabulary. So it's hard for people to understand if you're not speaking with that unified vocabulary. That's why a lot of the great artists throughout history were misfits, were outliers.
Mm-hmm.
And the people who really fit in with their little world then stay in their little world and can be at the top of their little world. But the big world is much bigger. It's a much bigger pyramid when you talk about creatives in general, people doing original works that stand on their own. And those original works, the original creatives, are the ones that eventually connect with the masses. And it might be after their lifetimes. It might be a Van Gogh who sold one painting in his entire life and then died, and eventually was discovered or recognized, I guess I should say, or it could be a Beethoven who became a sort of celebrity within the context of his lifetime and then lived on and got more famous afterwards.
Mhm.
Still, because they're pushing the envelope, they're taking vocabulary and creating on a greater scale of artistry than trying to live within the bubble that they're living in at that time. But we're seeing some creatives now who are pushing. And I don't personally love all of the things that they're doing. And you look at the people in history, like I love looking at the interviews and even letters of people 30 years ago, 50 years ago, my heroes who are talking all this shit about each other. It's hilarious. And they're all brilliant. But it's because they were using different vocabulary that was brilliant that they were like, no, whatever, that guy's doing, I'm doing my thing.
Right.
But they all stood the test of time and flowered out into these beautiful landscapes of works that were then recognized by the public because they were so great at being creative.
Mm-hmm. Well, you brought up Chicago.
Mm-hmm.
And I think Chicago, I mean, I've always believed Chicago is one of those melting pots of creatives because you've got people from both coasts coming here, but you've got homegrown people here too, and that are amazing. So it's almost like what you just brought up, how one thing's on the East Coast, one thing's on the West Coast, and there's different vocabularies and there's different vibes. Chicago's almost like a center melting pot, right? And you play with a lot of Chicago guys, one in being Makaya McCraven, who you're playing with at the showcase, but you tour with him a lot. And of course, you've played with Marquise Hill and everybody else. And it seems like this generation, your generation of these musicians, let's just say jazz musicians, but we can go into all the different cultural things, art and everything else. But let's just say jazz musicians that are in that age range. You guys seem like you're the first generation that are breaking out, but being creative and being able to do their own thing, but it works. And it's creative is what I'm getting at. Like
we're not the first though.
No, you're not the first, but I think maybe you're getting, I don't know, maybe it's social media or something, but you're able to do more stuff.
There's a landslide of recognition right now for Chicago, which is so good.
Yeah.
I'm so happy. There were the people. I mean, I just did a record with one of the people, Daryl Jones, a great bassist from Chicago, and there's the whole generation of Bobby Irving, the people who were actually discovered by Miles Davis, and who were picked up and brought into into the world stage from the homegrown skills that they had in Chicago. But there's something that I don't really agree with what you said, which is that Chicago is a melting pot. I feel like Chicago is more of a flower garden or let's call it an herb garden that is growing the herbs that are then used in the melting pots of other cities. You don't see people in Chicago. People are not moving from New York to Chicago. They're not moving from LA to Chicago. People are moving from Gary, Indiana to Chicago.
Right. Yeah. Right.
Or wherever. And it's called a melting pot of the Midwest, but this is the people who want something a little bit bigger than their small town and have a lot of skill come to Chicago and they cut their teeth here. But so many people in Chicago, including myself, eventually find themselves compelled to move out. And it's because our infrastructure is not as strong as LA and New York.
Is LA's infrastructure, because it's interesting. I mean, I know New York's infrastructure as far as creativity and as far as that whole thing. But with LA, it's obviously very different than New York, but with LA, it's so spread out, it seems to me, and there's so many, it's almost like different pockets of different things in LA. Why did you decide to go to LA instead of New York?
It's a good question. And
at least I have one good question in the whole interview. I try to do that.
I thought about it for a long time. I knew I had to not be in Chicago. I wasn't feeling, and man, there are some amazing facets to Chicago. The Jazz Institute is amazing. The Chicago Jazz Festival is amazing. I never played at the Chicago Jazz Festival. I never did anything with the Jazz Institute. I wanted to.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I don't know them well enough. I wasn't picked up for whatever. I don't fit into the demographic that they're trying to support specifically, whatever it is. I don't know exactly. And they're doing amazing work for Chicago and amazing work for the world. But I saw opportunities to become part of various things that were pulling me that said, we can use you. And that was in LA and that was in New York. And I was building on my own. I had released records of my own.
You had two releases in Chicago, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, my, well, actually, I mean, sort of 4. I did my record with Makaya and with Junius Paul. Even Deshaun Jones was on it. Corey Wilkes was on it. It's called
Oh, okay.
Radio Over Miles. I released it when I was like 22 or 23 years old.
Okay, all right.
Super underground thing. I put that out. I've taken it down. I'm probably going to do a re-release at some point of that in my other records. But I did that. I did a standards album with Makaya and Matt Eulery. I think Matt was on it. Was it? Or it was either him or Josh Ramos. It was so long ago, I can't remember now. And Melvin Butler, who's in Brian Blade's band.
Yep.
I did that record. I did the acoustic record with that was with Matt Eulery and Makaya. And then I did the electric record with Junius Paul and Makaya. But the electric record I sort of did while I was in LA, but I came back to Chicago and recorded
I remember the acoustic and I remember the electric.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, those are the two, because those are the most recent ones, right? So those are the ones.
Those are
I mean, of that.
Of that, yeah.
Yeah.
And then in LA, I recorded my Spirit Fingers record.
Right.
So I was working, man, and I was building it brick by brick and studying and figuring out my sound and playing with the people in Chicago, with these brilliant young minds who are finally now getting recognition on the world stage, like Makaya, for example.
Right, yeah.
It's
everywhere you turn, Makaya.
It's so good, man.
Yeah, it's amazing.
It's so good. And like, the funny thing is we're doing the same thing now that we were doing 12 years ago. It's not the same music, and we've developed a lot, but I was looking at videos that we did when I was 22 years old, and we were at Close Up 2
I remember that place. It's not too far from where this place is. It's not. That's where it was.
That club, man. And I did little video shoots there. Makaya and me and Junius Paul and Corey Wilkes and Deshaun Jones. We were all jamming out on like all this like rock, hip hop, jazz fusion stuff, and people loved it.
Yeah.
But it was confined to the club. We put out some videos.
Well, you know what I think too, and I'm going to just stop because I want to talk about that, because I think, especially like your generation of guys, you were influenced by all of that. But I think, and that was maybe this is part of the reason why you left Chicago, is that unless people could put it into the jazz or blues or Latin or whatever, they don't know what to do with it. There wasn't clubs to play that music. Now there are. And I think that that's one of those things where you guys, you're not thinking of stuff as jazz or anything. You're thinking of stuff as like Greg Spero. You're thinking of stuff as like Makaya McCraven. This is our music. It's a mixture of jazz, hip hop, rock, blues, jazz, whatever. You're not thinking
it's music.
Yeah, you're not thinking like, well, this is straight ahead jazz, and here I come.
And by the way, I want to correct myself on one thing that I just thought of while you were saying that, and I'll get back to that question. But I did play the Chicago Jazz Festival. They'll see this interview. I don't want them to be pissed off at me. I played it not with my own group. I played it with Frank Russell. I played it with Makaya.
Oh yeah, okay, yeah.
I played the Hyde Park Jazz Festival with my group. Love those guys. Judith Stein, Carolyn Albert. And,
they're awesome. They're the
God.
best.
Yeah,
They're the best.
I hope to play that again sometime soon. But yeah, so I did play with my colleagues.
Okay, all right, you're on the record.
Anyway, back to your question.
Yeah. Well, I mean, your generation are influenced by so many different styles that you don't really just call it jazz. You don't call it blues. You call it Greg Spero. You call it Makaya McCraven. And I think that back 12 years ago, you guys were doing stuff, but you walk into Andy's. Andy's is a straight ahead jazz club. You walk into the Jazz Showcase. It's the Jazz Showcase. You walk into the Green Mill. It's great clubs, but they weren't ready to start bringing that style of music in because they couldn't put it on a genre. Is that why you ended up you felt like maybe you were hitting a ceiling? You're like, you know what? I'm going to go. There's opportunities other places that understand what's happening here.
It wasn't that the clubs, because no clubs get that.
Yeah.
New York, LA, a club is a club. A club is there to take people's money and serve them drinks and be a business, which I get it. It's okay.
Well,
like
that's what has to happen, right?
There are people, and some of the club owners feel a responsibility to the community to push the envelope of culture. And that's where you get clubs that will allow you to be free. And even the clubs that were in Chicago were kind of like that. I remember playing Close Up 2. I mean, I did get pushback from the owner on what I played. I would sometimes be too adventurous.
Yeah.
And he wanted, because it was technically called a smooth jazz club,
right.
And I am so not smooth jazz.
No,
I never liked it. I never wanted to be involved in it. It's funny because when I signed to Shanachie Records for my last record, they put out a ton of smooth jazz. I told them like, okay, let's do this. Don't associate me with your other artists, except for there are some really great ones. I mean, I shouldn't shit on anybody.
No, but that's not your genre.
It's
You don't
just not
want
my
to.
genre.
Yeah.
It's and there are incredible artists who play smooth jazz. Don't get me
Oh,
wrong.
there are.
Um, but it's not a genre that I feel like culturally a part of, because the music that I put out is not like, everything is commercial in a way. Like, if someone's not consuming it to some degree, I mean, I want my art to be heard.
Right.
And Herbie Hancock wanted his art to be heard when he did Headhunters.
Mm-hmm.
That was commercial in a way. But there's a different way of, if you want to, there's a way to compromise and tone down the soul. Like, there's a way to hear something and not do it, and then do the thing that you think people want to hear, and that sucks.
Right.
That's the worst thing that an artist can do. That will kill you. That will make you want to kill yourself if you're a creative. You don't want to live a lifestyle doing that, and I know people who do, and they're miserable.
Well, that's what a true artist doesn't do, is compromise, right?
Yes, a true artist does not compromise, and there are true artists that you will never hear because they didn't compromise, and they also didn't know how to take in the world and like output that through their soul. And so they only like lived in their own little secluded pocket, and I do know artists like that as well. And they're amazing, but they're never going to be heard. But then there are the artists like Herbie and like Quincy who say like, okay, I'm a human being, and there are all these human beings around me, and there's brilliance all around me. I'm a tiny thread in this tapestry of human existence. And that tapestry includes all of the works of Bach, and that tapestry includes all of the rhythms of Jay Dilla, and that tapestry includes all of the soul of Sly and the Family Stone. And you could name 10,000 other facets through history, going from the most popular to the least popular. And many of them will be recognizable, but all of those are threads in the tapestry of creativity, and we take those in and we absorb them. I listened to Green Day when I was growing up. I play some stuff that sounds a little like Green Day in some of the stuff that I'm playing because I listened to it when I was in 5th grade on the way to school with my little Walkman. It all goes into us, and it comes out through the art that we output. And a true artist is someone who allows that to flow through you. And luckily for me and for Makaya and for Kamasi Washington and for Thundercat and for the people who are doing this great music in our generation now, luckily the world is kind of into that now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
They might not have been, and we would have been doing the same thing. Probably doing other things too. I mean, man, McCoy Tyner drove a cab while he was playing,
amazing?
at a point while he was playing with Coltrane.
Yeah.
He drove a cab to make a living. Like, I'm lucky that I don't have to do that, because I also have some other business sense and capability just from exposure that I had growing up to other shit. And so I do that as well in the context of the music business, so I can make a living. But it all has to do with my art, and it all like feeds into it, which is a promise I made to myself a long time ago.
Yeah.